Hello, my name is Valeria. This is my new original story on my channel. Subscribe and enjoy.
She knew the Alpha King was dead. She had his child to prove it. Then he walked through her door. She never told anyone his name, not because she had forgotten it, because he had never given it to her. For 3 years, Nora kept the secret folded tight inside her chest, the way you keep a wound that has not quite healed. She kept it through the long, silent winters in her cottage at the edge of the Ashwood. She kept it through the first cry of her son in the flickering dark of a midwife's lantern. She kept it through every morning when the boy opened his eyes, and she saw the color of them, silver gray and clear and impossible, and had to remind herself that the man who gave him those eyes was dead. She had been there. She had watched him bleed. And still, Nora pressed 2 fingers into the carved face of the coin and could not move. It was a market day in the capital, the first she had made the journey for in almost 2 years. She had come for medicines she could not source from the Ashwood alone, for certain root powders and dried bark, and a length of clean linen. Simple things. Safe things. She had left her son, Wren, with her neighbor Etta, who was old and sharp-tongued, and loved the boy with a ferocity that Nora found quietly comforting. She had not intended to stop at the coin merchant's stall, but the glint of new silver had caught her eye, and the merchant had pressed one into her palm to show her the freshness of the minting. And now she stood in the middle of a crowded market square and could not breathe. The face on the coin was clean, proud, precise. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw like something carved from stone, hair falling past the collar in loose waves. Eyes she could not see, of course, because eyes did not render in silver, but she knew them. She knew them the way she knew her own hands. Below the portrait, a name: Caelan, Alpha King of Varath. 3rd year of his reign. 3rd year. 3 years ago, a man with those same cheekbones had collapsed in the undergrowth at the edge of her forest, bleeding from 4 wounds she had no business being able to close. 3 years ago, she had dragged him inside by his arms because she was not strong enough to carry him. 3 years ago, she had spent 3 weeks doing everything she knew how to do, and several things she had only read about, to keep him from dying. He had not died, but he had left, and she had told herself, in the months that followed, that she did not know who he was, that the ring she had found in the torn pocket of his coat, the one she had never looked at too closely, because looking too closely felt dangerous, had not told her anything, that the way he moved, even half-conscious, even fever-wrecked and barely coherent, with that particular quality of authority that men are not taught, but are simply born with, had not told her anything either. She had told herself a great many things. The coin merchant was watching her with mild concern. Nora set the silver piece down on his table with a hand that did not shake, which surprised her. She paid for the linen and the root powders, and walked back through the market at a pace that was not quite running. And she thought about Wren's silver-gray eyes, and she thought about the ring she had buried in a box beneath her floorboards 3 years ago, and she thought, if he is alive, he left on purpose. If he is alive, and he left on purpose, then he knows about the child. If he knows about the child, and he left anyway, then they are both safer with him believing they do not exist. She was almost to the edge of the market when the 2 royal guards stepped into her path. Chapter 1. The guards were polite. That was the thing she noticed first, and it frightened her more than rudeness would have. They did not grab her or raise their voices. They simply positioned themselves, one to each side, with the practiced ease of men who did not need to be threatening, because their presence already was. The one on her left had a seal on his collar, the royal crest of Verath, a wolf's head above a crown, pressed in dark wax onto leather. New, official. Nora of Ashwood, the taller one asked. She considered for a fraction of a second, saying no. Yes, she said instead, because lying to men with royal seals in the middle of the capital's market square was a particular kind of foolishness she could not afford. You are requested to accompany us. By whom? The guard looked at her with something that might have been sympathy, or might have been its precise opposite. By His Majesty, the Alpha King. The walk through the city took 20 minutes. Nora spent every one of them cataloging what she knew and what she did not know, and what she needed to decide before she walked through whatever door they were leading her to. The guards did not speak to her again. They did not explain. They moved her through the city's wide main avenues with the smooth, unhurried efficiency of men who had done this before and expected no resistance. She thought about Wren. She thought, he is in Ashwood. He is with Edda. He is 2 days' ride from this city, in a cottage at the edge of a forest that no one has ever cared enough about to look at. He is safe. He is safe. He is safe, she thought, unless someone already went to Ashwood. The palace gates were white stone, older than anything else in the city by the look of them, weathered smooth by centuries of wind. The guards brought her in through a side entrance, not the grand approach, which meant either she was unimportant or she was important enough that they did not want her seen. She was not sure which was worse. They brought her to a waiting room with a window that looked out over a courtyard where 3 young wolves were running drills in the cold morning air. A fire burned in the hearth. Someone had left a cup of tea on the low table, still steaming. She did not touch it. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the fire and thought about what she was going to say. The problem with the truth was that it was the most dangerous thing she owned. She could say, I do not know who you are. I found a wounded man in the forest 3 years ago. I treated him. He left. I do not know his name. All of that was technically true. None of it would hold. She could feel it the way she could feel a change in weather, the particular pressure in the air that meant something was coming. Whatever had brought her here was not a coincidence. You did not send 2 guards with royal seals to collect a village herbalist in a market square because you were curious about her root powders. She heard footsteps in the corridor outside, not the measured tread of guards. Something different, deliberate and quiet, the kind of step that does not announce itself because it does not need to. The door opened, and 3 years collapsed into nothing. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply forgotten, the way you forget the exact scale of something that has only existed for a long time, as a coin portrait in your chest. He was dressed plainly for a king. Dark coat, no ornament except the ring on his right hand, which she recognized because she had once held it in her palm for a long moment before putting it back in his torn coat pocket. His hair was shorter than it had been. His face was exactly the same. He stopped when he saw her. The expression that moved across his features was not recognition. It was something older than that. Something that did not know yet what it was looking at. "Leave us," he said, and the guards behind him withdrew without a sound. The room was very quiet. Nora did not stand. She was not sure her legs would cooperate, and she refused to let him see her stumble. He looked at her for a long moment. His brow drew together, a slight crease between the edges of his perfect brows, the expression of a man trying to locate something just out of reach. "You know me," he said at last. It was not a question. "I treated you," she said, 3 years ago. You were injured in the forest near my village. You stayed for 3 weeks. He was watching her with an intensity that felt like pressure on her skin. "I know," he said. She waited. "I know that I was there," he continued. "I know the general shape of it. I was told I was discovered by a village healer. I was told I recovered and returned to the capital." His jaw tightened slightly. "What I was not told, what no one has been able to tell me, is anything specific about the weeks between. I have no memory of them." The fire crackled. Nora looked at the man who was her son's father, who sat on the throne of the largest kingdom on this continent, who had 3 years' worth of power and armies and advisors at his disposal, and who was looking at her the way a man looks at a word he cannot quite read. "Nothing," she said. "Nothing that holds," he said. "Fragments, a smell, a quality of light. Nothing I can use." He paused. "Do you understand why I had you brought here? You are looking for what happened during those weeks." "Yes," she said carefully. "What do you believe happened?" Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, precisely. More like the possibility of it, held at a controlled distance. "I believe I was in the care of someone who kept me alive when I should not have survived. I believe whoever that person was, they deserve to be acknowledged for it. And I believe," he said, his voice dropping just slightly, "that there is something I am not remembering, and that it matters." She looked at him. She thought about Wren, asleep in Etta's cottage, with his silver-gray eyes, and the way he had begun, in the last month, to shift in his sleep without meaning to, a trembling under his skin like something trying to surface. 3 years old, and already the wolf in him was restless. She thought about the 2 guards with royal seals. She thought about what it meant that he had found her. "Your Majesty," she said at last, "I think there are things you need to know. And I think there are people in this palace who have made certain decisions about what you should and should not be told. And I think," she said, meeting his gaze squarely, "that we are running out of time to have this conversation in private." He went very still. "Explain," he said. Chapter 2. She did not tell him everything. Not yet. She told him what was safe to tell, which was most of the truth, and she watched his face as she spoke, and tried to read what was behind his eyes. She told him about the night she found him, the blood, the 4 wounds, the fever that had spiked so badly on the 3rd day that she had genuinely believed she was going to lose him. She told him about the weeks of recovery, the slowness of it, the patience required from both of them. She did not tell him about the weeks of conversation in the dark, when the fever had broken, but the weakness still held him in her cottage, and they had talked the way people talk, when they believe it does not count, because one of them is barely alive. She did not tell him about the morning she had woken to find him standing at the window of her cottage, looking out at the Ashwood with an expression she had not been able to read, and how he had turned when he heard her, and said, in a voice that had no performance in it at all, "I do not think I have stood somewhere like this in a very long time." She did not tell him about Wren, not yet, but she told him about the ring. You had a ring, she said, in the pocket of your coat, pressed into the lining, which is why I did not notice it immediately. When I found it, I put it back. I thought if you woke up and found me with it, you would think I had stolen it. He was watching her very carefully now. Describe it, he said. A black stone, oval, set in silver, an engraving on the inside of the band. She paused. I did not read it. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I made a deliberate choice not to know who you were. Why? Because, she said, knowing who you were would have made it harder to let you leave. The silence after that was different from the silences before it, heavier and more careful on both sides. He stood and walked to the window, and she watched the set of his shoulders and thought about how many times she had watched him stand exactly like that, in her cottage, outlined against the light. The ring, he said, with his back to her. I had it when I arrived here. I remember that much. It is a seal ring, my mother's. I have worn it since I was 14 years old. He turned around. I did not give it to anyone for safekeeping during those weeks. It was in my coat, because I had been traveling in disguise, without my royal marks, which means someone already knew to keep me anonymous. Your advisors, she said. Yes. They came to collect you, she said, or to confirm you were alive. He looked at her. You saw them? No. I saw signs. Boot prints that were not yours or mine. A broken branch at the eastern edge of the clearing that had not been broken by an animal. She paused. I am a healer in a border forest. I noticed these things. And you said nothing. I decided, she said carefully, that if someone powerful enough to send trackers into the Ashwood wanted me to know they had been there, they would have made themselves known. They chose not to. I chose to respect that. He studied her for a long moment, with those silver-gray eyes that she had been looking at for 3 years, on the face of her son. What is your name? He said at last. Nora. Nora. He said it the way someone says a word they have been trying to remember. Nora of Ashwood. Yes. Tell me, he said quietly, what it is you believe I need to know before we run out of time. She looked at him. She thought, this is the moment. She thought, once I say it, there is no path back. She thought about Wren, his little face tipped up at the night sky last week, pointing at the full moon with such pure, uncomplicated joy that her chest had ached with the force of loving him. Your Majesty, she said, you have a son. Chapter 3. He did not move. She had imagined this moment many times, not with any real intention of it happening, because for 3 years she had been fairly certain it never would. But she had imagined it the way you imagine difficult things in the dark, as a form of preparation, a way of making yourself less fragile before a blow that might or might not come. In her imagination, he had reacted in a number of ways. Denial, anger, the cold withdrawal of someone who has been told something inconvenient, the calculated assessment of a powerful man confronting an unexpected liability. What she had not imagined was this. He sat down, not in a chair. He simply sank onto the edge of the low table, as if his legs had made a quiet decision without consulting the rest of him. He sat there with his hands on his knees, and his head bowed, and the particular stillness of someone who is processing something that has no precedent in their experience. How old? He said. 3 years. He will be 4 in the spring. He raised his head. The expression on his face was not what she expected. It was not calculation, and it was not performance. It was something raw and unguarded, and entirely without the careful control she had seen in every other moment since he walked through that door. "A son," he said. "Yes. And you have been—" He stopped, restarted. "You have raised him alone, in the forest. Yes. Knowing, suspecting," she said. "I did not know who you were. Not with certainty. Not until today." He looked at her with something that was difficult to name. It moved through his features like weather moves through a landscape, fast and transforming, and leaving everything slightly altered in its wake. "What is his name?" "Wren." A pause. "What does he look like?" She had known this question would come, and still it found a crack in her composure. "He looks," she said steadily, "exactly like you." He stood up again. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, and she could see the tension in him from across the room, the held breath of it. "You came to the capital today," he said. "For the first time in some time, I would guess. Why today?" "I needed supplies. And you saw the coin." "Yes." He turned around. His face had resolved back into something more controlled, but his eyes had not. His eyes were doing something she had seen once before, in the earliest days of his fever, when his body had been fighting so hard to survive that everything else had been stripped away, and what remained was simply the essential fact of him, something undefended and entirely real. "Did my advisors know you were in the city? Your guards found me in the market square, within an hour of my arriving. They were watching for you," he said. It was not a question. It would seem so. He crossed the room to his desk and placed both hands flat on the surface and looked at nothing for a moment. She could see him thinking. She could see the shape of it, the way a strategist moves through information, sorting and weighing and arriving at conclusions she was not yet privy to. "They knew," he said quietly. "They knew about you. They knew I had been there. They said nothing." He looked up at her. "For 3 years. They said nothing. Yes. Because of the betrothal," he said. "The alliance with the Harwick line. My intended." The word came out with a precise flatness. "A child would complicate it. A child who shifts at 3 years old would be more than a complication." Nora went very still. "How do you know he shifts?" she said. He looked at her. "Because I shifted at 3 years old," he said. "Exactly. As did my father, and his father before him. The royal line of Varath carries the early shift. It has not appeared in any bloodline outside the direct succession in 4 generations." He paused. "My advisors know this. Every senior member of my court knows this. It is one of the ways a king's heir is identified." The implications of that settled over her like cold water. "They sent someone to Ashwood," she said. "Before they sent for you," he confirmed. "To look, to assess." His jaw tightened. "And then they sent for you, which means they made a decision about what to do about what they found." "They came to me last night," she said. He went very still. "Lord Dren," she continued. "He was waiting in my room at the inn. He offered me money. He told me the child's existence would destroy the peace treaty with the Harwick family. He said—" She paused. "He said the boy could disappear quietly, that there would be a story, an illness." The silence in the room was complete. She watched Kaylin's face and saw something move through it that she had no word for in any language she spoke. It was not simply anger. Anger was too small a container for what crossed his features in that moment. Too ordinary a thing. This was the particular quality of a man realizing that people he trusted had been sitting across tables from him for 3 years, knowing what they knew, and had chosen, every single day, to let him search for what they had buried. "Lord Dren," he said, very quietly. "Yes." "He is my head advisor," he said. "He has been with my family since before I was born." "I know." He looked at her. "And you are telling me this." "I am telling you this," she said, "because Wren is in Ashwood with a woman who is 70 years old and does not know that anyone knows he exists. I am telling you this because someone already went to Ashwood, which means someone already knows exactly where he is. And I am telling you this because I came here alone, and Lord Dren knows I came here alone, which means he knows that no one is watching." She met his gaze and did not look away. "Your Majesty, your son is not safe." He was already moving. "If you are wondering what happens next, do not go anywhere. What Kaelin does in the next few minutes will change everything. Subscribe now, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one." Chapter 4. He called for no one. That was the thing she noticed as she followed him through the palace corridors, walking fast enough that she had to lengthen her stride to keep up with him. He did not summon guards. He did not send a runner to the stables or call for an aide. He moved through his own palace with the contained urgency of a man who has suddenly understood that the people he would normally call on are precisely the people he cannot trust. "How many?" he said, without slowing. "How many what? How many people does Drin have loyal to him in this palace? I do not know your palace. Estimate." "He has been here 30 years, she said. "He placed the appointments, or most of them, before you were old enough to make them yourself. I would guess at least half." He made a sound that was not quite a word. They came to a part of the palace she had not seen, older corridors with lower ceilings and stone that had been worn smooth by centuries of boots. He stopped at a door that looked like a storage room and pressed his hand against the left side of the frame, and it opened inward into a narrow passage lit by evenly spaced candles. "Come," he said. She came. The passage ran the length of what felt like 2 courtyards before opening into a small chamber with a fire and a locked chest and 2 cloaks hanging from hooks on the wall. He went to the chest, unlocked it, and began moving through its contents with the efficiency of someone who has thought about this room and what it was for. "This was my mother's emergency room," he said. "She built it when I was an infant, when there was a succession dispute, and she needed a place that was not known to the council." He took out a sealed document and broke it without ceremony. "There is a secondary stable outside the eastern wall, not palace-managed, private. 3 horses, always ready." She believed in preparation. "She sounds formidable," Nora said. She was. He looked up briefly. "She died when I was 12. Fever." Something moved across his face and was gone. "I have kept this room exactly as she left it. I have never told Dren about it." "Then he does not know you are here?" "No." He folded the document and placed it in the pocket of his coat. Then he took one of the cloaks from the wall, plain dark wool, and held it out to her. "Your cottage in the Ashwood. 2 days' ride if we push. 1.5 if we ride through the night. Is there a faster route?" She took the cloak. "If you know the river path through the eastern passes. I do not normally use it because it is hard going on foot. On horseback it cuts half a day." "I know it," he said. "We leave in 10 minutes. "We," she said. He looked at her. "You are coming with me," he said. It was not a question, but it also was not a command. It was the voice of someone stating a thing that seems to him obvious. He is my son. I am not sending someone else. She looked back at him. She had spent 3 years building a life in the Ashwood that had nothing to do with this man. A clean, quiet life, with Wren and her herbs, and Etta's sharp tongue, and the particular deep peace of a forest in the early morning. She had built that life precisely because she had understood, even before she knew his name, that everything about him was the kind of complicated that does not resolve neatly, that his world had sharp edges, that his world was not hers. And she was looking at him now, in this hidden room his dead mother had built against exactly this kind of crisis, and she thought, but Wren is his world, whether either of us intended that or not. All right, she said. They rode out of the capital as the afternoon light began to flatten and go gold. 2 figures in plain, dark cloaks, on horses that were good enough to be conspicuous, if anyone looked too closely. He rode the way he did everything, with an economy of movement that made it look effortless. She rode the way she had learned to ride at 17, practically and without elegance, and she did not care. For a long time they did not speak. The road opened out of the city into farmland, and then into the broader spaces of the eastern countryside, rolling hills and scattered woodland, and the sky above them went from gold to rose to a deep and saturated gray. You should know something, he said, when they were far enough from the city that the road was empty around them. She waited. The 3 months I lost, he said, not looking at her, watching the road ahead. When I returned to the capital, Dren told me I had been found by local healers and had recovered in a house somewhere. He gave me no specific information. I accepted it because I was... He paused, seeming to choose the word carefully. I was not in a state to question. I had survived something I should not have survived. I was grateful. I believed it was over. He glanced at her briefly. I want you to understand that I did not know. About you. About the child. I know, she said. I should have known. The words were flat and not quite without emotion. I should have pushed harder. I should have found you years ago. She thought about how to answer that. You had a kingdom to run, she said at last. I had a son I did not know existed. Yes, she said, but you also could not have known what you did not know. The fault is not yours. Not entirely. He was quiet for a moment. You are more generous than I deserve. I am practical, she said. Assigning blame is a task for people who have leisure for it. We do not currently have that leisure. Something moved across his profile in the growing dusk. It took her a moment to identify it. He was almost smiling. No, he agreed. We do not. Chapter 5. They camped in the shelter of a stand of pines when the moon rose, and the road became too uncertain for safe riding. He built the fire with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, and she unpacked the small provisions she had bought that morning at the market, and thought about how the day had begun, which had been ordinary, and how it was ending, which was not. He sat across the fire from her, and she was aware, with an uncomfortable precision, of the particular quality of silence that settles between two people who know things about each other that have not yet been said aloud. He will not know me, Kaelin said. She looked up. Wren, he said. He will not know who I am. No, she said. He does not know anything about his father except that you existed and that you left before he was born. He absorbed that. What did you tell him? that his father was someone I cared for when he was hurt, that he had to go away, that it was not anyone's fault. She paused. He is 3 years old. He has not asked difficult questions yet. He will. I know. What will you do, she said, when we reach him? When this is settled, however it settles, what do you intend? He looked at her across the fire. The light moved across his face, and she was struck, as she had been many times since that morning, by the strangeness of knowing someone's face so well from one person and seeing it again on another. Wren had his father's bones and his father's eyes, and a particular set to his mouth when he was concentrating that she had not, until today, had any frame of reference for. I intend, he said, to be his father. She waited for the qualification, the practical appendage, the careful hedge that powerful men attach to declarations that complicated their existing arrangements. It did not come. That is not a simple thing, she said carefully. I know. You have a betrothal, a political alliance, which was made without my knowledge of the relevant circumstances, he said. A betrothal made in ignorance of an existing heir can be dissolved. It is established law in Varath. A pause. The Harwick family will not be pleased. No. Their displeasure, he said, with a precise flatness, is less concerning to me at this moment than the fact that someone in my palace sent men to my son's location and has been waiting to see whether I would simply follow the arrangement they had made. What will you do about Dren? What needs to be done? His jaw tightened. I have spent 3 years trusting a man who made choices he had no right to make, who looked at my heir and decided what the king needed to know about him, who... He stopped. The controlled fury in him was audible, even when the words were not. He took 3 years from me, he said, very quietly. 3 years I could have known my son. He does not get to decide that. That was not his to take. The fire crackled between them. Nora looked at this man who was so many things at once, king and stranger, and the father of her child, and the person she had watched fight to survive in her cottage for 3 weeks, 3 years ago. She thought about what it meant to trust someone. She thought about what it meant to be trusted. He looks like you, she said again, for no particular reason, except that it felt true and important, and she wanted him to have that. He looked at her. What is he like? Kaelin said, and the control in his voice cracked just slightly at the edges. The smallest thing. She would have missed it if she had not spent 3 years listening to the exact quality of his son's voice when it cracked in the same way, when Wren was trying to be brave about something small and familiar and impossible. She told him. She told him about Wren's laugh, which was enormous and unself-conscious. The laugh of someone who has not yet learned to be careful about being happy. She told him about the way the boy collected things, pebbles and feathers and once a spectacularly ugly piece of bark that he had insisted was a dragon, and how she had never once been able to convince him to throw any of it away. She told him about the early shift, the trembling under the skin in full moonlight, the silver that bled into his eyes when he was excited or frightened or overwhelmingly joyful. She told him about the morning, 2 months ago, when Wren had climbed into her bed before dawn and pressed his small, warm back against her spine, and said, out of the clear dark, "Mama, does my papa have a wolf like mine?" She had said she did not know. Kaelin was very quiet when she finished. "Yes," he said at last. "His wolf is like mine." Something warm moved through her chest, and she did not examine it. "We should sleep," she said. "We have a long ride tomorrow." "Yes." But he did not move to sleep. He sat with his forearms on his knees and looked at the fire with an expression she recognized from a long time ago, from the early days of his recovery, when he had been too weak to move, but too awake to rest. The expression of someone in a quiet, private war with something that they are going to win, but not without cost. She lay down on her side of the fire and watched the flames and thought about what tomorrow would bring, and eventually she slept. Chapter 6. She woke to Kaylin's hand on her shoulder, firm and quiet. She was on her feet before she was fully conscious, which was an old habit from her years in the Ashwood, where the sounds at the edge of sleep were sometimes significant. "Someone followed us," he said, very low. "How many?" "2, maybe 3. They are good. I would not have heard them if I had not been listening for it." She pulled her cloak around her and was glad she had not removed her boots. The fire had burned to embers. The pines around them were dark, and the moon had moved, which meant it was several hours past midnight. "Dren's men," she said, almost certainly. He was already moving toward the horses, smooth and unhurried, the kind of quiet that requires practice. "We ride. Now. The river path." "In the dark?" "The horses know that road. I have ridden it in worse conditions." He glanced back at her. "Can you follow me through difficult terrain?" "Yes," she said, and did not add that she had spent 3 years riding forest paths alone at night, because the Ashwood did not keep civilized hours, and neither did the people who needed her skills. They rode. The river path was not kind. It was narrow and uneven, and it ran along the edge of a drop for the better part of an hour, and the darkness made it worse, and the sound of pursuit behind them made it worse still. She heard them once, maybe half a mile back, the crash of a horse through undergrowth moving too fast for the terrain. She kept her eyes on Kaylin's back and rode. He was, she had to admit, extremely good at this. She had not known him as a man who did things. She had known him as a man who was still, who recovered slowly, who spoke quietly in the dark about a great number of things. She had not known him as someone who moved through difficult country on horseback in the dark, with the focused competence of someone who had done it before, under worse circumstances. She found that she was not surprised. They cleared the river path as the sky began to lighten in the east, that particular not yet dawn color that is neither blue nor gray, but something between. The horses were breathing hard, and so was she, but the sounds of pursuit had fallen away. Either they had lost them in the terrain, or the pursuers had made a decision about the risk. "How far?" he said. "An hour," she said. "Perhaps less if we push." They pushed. The Ashwood came into view as the sun broke properly over the hills, pale and clean against the tree line, the smell of it familiar in a way that eased something in her chest. She knew every inch of this forest. She had spent 3 years making it hers. She guided him through it, without needing to think about it. The right turn at the split oak, left along the stream, up the rise past the stones that looked like sleeping animals in the low morning light. The cottage came into view. Etta was in the doorway before they had even dismounted. She was a small woman, ancient and weathered, with eyes like polished wood, and she was looking at Nora with an expression that was half relief and half an extremely precise annoyance. "You are 12 hours late," Etta said. "I know," Nora said. "I am sorry. Men came asking about the boy last night. Nora went cold. What men? What did you tell them? I told them I had no idea what boy they were referring to, and that they had the wrong cottage, Etta said, with magnificent composure. And I put Wren under the floorboards in the back room. She looked past Nora at Kaelin, who had dismounted and was standing very still at the edge of the clearing. Something in Etta's expression changed. "Ah," the old woman said. "Etta." "I have eyes," Etta said. "Bring him inside." Wren was under the floorboards. It was a space Nora had built 2 years ago, after the first time the wolf under his skin had surfaced in front of someone who should not have seen it. A deep, dry space beneath the back room, with enough air and enough room for a small person to be comfortable. She had told him it was a game, a den. He took to it with the enthusiasm of someone who had always suspected that dens were exactly the right idea. She lifted the board. He came out with his hair full of wood shavings, and both fists full of the pebbles he kept down there, and his eyes wide and sleep-blurred and silver around the edges, from having been frightened. "Mama," he said, with a breath of pure relief, and threw himself at her. She caught him. She held him with her face in his hair, and breathed, and felt the specific weight of him, this particular weight, this person, and was quietly and entirely overwhelmed for a moment. Then Wren lifted his head. He looked past her shoulder at the man standing in the doorway of the back room. Children do not have the adult capacity for controlled response. They have not yet learned to make their faces say one thing, while their bodies say another. Wren looked at Kaelin with a child's complete and unfiltered attention, that particular focused stillness that means something very specific has caught a young animal's notice. Then, very quietly, the silver bled further into his eyes. Not fear. She knew what fear looked like on him. This was something else, something older than either of them. "Mama," Wren said without looking away from Kaelin. "His wolf smells like mine." Nora's arms tightened around him. She looked at Kaelin over the top of her son's head. He had gone entirely still. His hands were at his sides. His face had done the thing again that she had seen twice now, that thing that had no name and no managed performance in it, the essential undefended fact of him. His eyes, she noticed, had gone silver around the edges. Chapter 7. Etta, with the wisdom of a woman who had seen a great many things in 70 years, made a reason to be in the front room and shut the door behind her. They sat on the floor of the back room, which was the size of a generous wardrobe, and smelled of wood shavings and dried lavender. Nora with her back against the wall, and Wren in her lap, and Kaelin across from them with his knees drawn up and his eyes on his son. Wren examined him with the thorough and completely shameless curiosity that he brought to all new things. "Your eyes are like mine," Wren said at last. "Yes," Kaelin said. "Etta's eyes are brown. Mama's eyes are green. My eyes are gray, like yours." A pause while he processed this. "Are you a wolf too?" "Yes." "A big one?" "Yes." Wren considered this with great seriousness. "I am a small one," he said, "but Mama says I will be big when I grow up. She says I already have big wolf energy. She says that like it is something complicated, but I think it is mostly good." Something moved across Kaelin's face that she was fairly certain was not entirely unlike a smile. "It is mostly good," he agreed. Wren turned his head and looked up at Nora. She could feel him thinking. She had always been able to feel him thinking. He was a child who did not ask questions until he was ready, who turned things over quietly inside himself first, and only brought them out when they had resolved into something he could hold steady. "Mama," he said, "is this my papa?" The room was very quiet. She looked at Kaelin. He was looking back at her, and his expression was asking her something, not demanding, not instructing, asking, as if this was a thing that was hers to decide. She looked down at her son. "Yes," she said, "this is your papa." Ren looked at Kaelin for a long moment. Then he climbed out of her lap and crossed the small space between them and sat down next to the King of Varath, with the complete matter-of-fact composure of someone who has decided that this is simply where he belongs. He opened his fist and held out one of his pebbles. "This is a good one," Ren said. "It has a stripe. You can have it if you want." Kaelin looked at the pebble in the small offered palm. He took it very carefully. He turned it over in his fingers. The striped gray stone, the size of a thumbnail. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was entirely steady, which Nora thought took considerable effort. "You are welcome," Ren said, with the grave courtesy that he deployed on special occasions. Then he leaned against his father's arm, settled himself like a small animal finding warmth, and closed his eyes, because he had been awake all night under the floorboards, and he was 3 years old, and trust was not a complicated thing to him yet. Nora watched Kaelin's hand come up slowly and rest, with a carefulness she recognized from a long time ago, against the top of his son's head. She watched the careful stillness of him. She watched him breathe. Outside the window, horses, not their horses. Edda's voice, pleasant and impenetrable, saying something in the front room. Nora was on her feet in an instant. She touched Kaelin's shoulder briefly. A question. He nodded, already shifting Ren gently, carefully, back against the wall without waking him, which should not have been possible, given that Ren woke at the sound of a falling leaf, but somehow worked. Perhaps because children sense something trustworthy in their bones before their minds catch up. She opened the back door. There were 4 of them in the clearing, 3 riders, and 1 on foot, who had come around the side of the cottage from the tree line. Palace men, by the look of their coats, but nothing on them to identify whose men specifically. The one on foot was close. Too close. She had lived alone in a forest for 3 years. She had learned things. She was already moving. What she did next was not elegant. It did not need to be. The man in the trees went down with a sound of genuine surprise, which she found oddly satisfying, and she was back inside and had the bar across the back door before any of the riders had dismounted. Kaelin was in the doorway of the back room. "How many?" he said. 4. 3 mounted. There will be more. Dren would not send 4 men for this. I know. She was already at the hidden shelf behind the water barrel, the one Edda did not know about, because Nora had installed it 2 years ago, after a very unpleasant experience with a traveler who had mistaken her isolation for vulnerability. She took out the 2 items on it and turned around. He looked at what was in her hands. A knife and a sealed vial. "What is the vial?" he said. "Something that will make a significant amount of smoke and a significant amount of noise," she said. "I developed it for deterring wolves who get too interested in the cottage. It also works on people." He looked at her. "You have lived here alone for 3 years," he said. Not quite a statement and not quite a question. "Yes." "With a child who shifts." "Yes." "And you prepared for situations like this one." "I am a practical person." He was quiet for a moment. Then, the smoke. "Where do you need to be when it goes off?" "Away from it." Then we need to move him first. He glanced back at the sleeping wren. I know. This part she did not examine too closely. There was no time to examine it, and there was also something in it, in the specific collaboration of moving their son through a crisis together, that was too new and too large to hold at the same time as everything else that was happening. She noted it. She folded it away. They moved. Chapter 8. The smoke was spectacular. She had perhaps, over the years, improved the formula somewhat. The original version had been designed to discourage a curious wolf. The current version produced a column of black that was visible from a considerable distance, and a sound like the end of a very short era. The 3 mounted men scattered. The man she had knocked down in the trees did not scatter, because he had not yet woken up. Wren, pressed against Kaelin's side at the edge of the Ashwood, watched the smoke with enormous round eyes, and said, "Again," with the tone of someone who has just discovered their favorite thing. "Later," Nora said. "Probably not," Kaelin said quietly, and she almost smiled. They were in the trees when the reinforcements arrived. 7 more, from the direction of the main road, which meant someone had planned a perimeter. She could hear them moving through the Ashwood, and she assessed, quietly and carefully, what she knew about this forest and what they did not. She knew every path in the Ashwood. She knew which ones looked like paths and were not, and which ones looked impassable and were not. She knew where the stream ran underground for 40 feet and surfaced again in the hollow where the old stones were. And she knew the path that ran the ridge above the hollow and could not be seen from below. And she knew that there was, 3 miles east, a road that ran toward the border of Verath, and then north, toward the garrison station at Cauldron, which was military and not palace-controlled, and which would, therefore, be staffed by men who reported to the crown, directly, rather than to any specific advisor. She took them north. Kaelin followed her without question. He had Wren, who had fallen back asleep against his shoulder, with the extraordinary adaptability of very young children in crisis, and he moved through the undergrowth without making a sound that she would not have expected from a man his size. She did not have time to be impressed by this, but she noted it. They moved fast. The pursuit lost them somewhere around the underground stream, which she had expected, and they made the ridge path without being heard. And then it was simply a matter of moving north at speed through terrain that grew clearer and more open as the Ashwood gave way to the broader forests of the eastern province. She watched him carry her sleeping son through the trees. She noted, in the particular careful register she maintained for things that were too significant to fully feel in the moment, the way Kaelin's hand was curved against the back of Wren's head, automatic and protective, the instinct of something that does not need to be learned, because it is simply there. 3 years, she thought. They would have been different, these 3 years. She did not know if they would have been better. She did not know if better was even the right frame for it. She had built a life in the Ashwood that was genuinely hers, that she had chosen and shaped and populated with exactly the things she needed. It was a good life. It was a life she was proud of. But she thought, watching him in the early morning light between the trees, about all the mornings she had looked at Wren's silver-gray eyes and thought, "You do not know what you came from. You do not know that it was real." She thought. It was real. The garrison at Cauldron was 2 hours' ride from the edge of the Ashwood. They reached it in the late morning, approaching from the tree line on foot, because she had sensibly left the horses when the path became impassable, and the garrison gates opened at Kaelin's word, and the captain on duty went several very distinct colors when he realized who he was looking at. Wren woke up as they came through the gates. He looked at the garrison with alert interest. He had never seen a garrison before. "Mama," he said, "there are so many soldiers." "Yes," she said. "Do they all have wolves?" "Most of them." He processed this. "Good," he said, with the decisiveness of someone who has reached an important conclusion. "I like places with wolves." Kaelin, who was speaking quietly and with great intensity to the garrison captain, glanced across at his son. The expression on his face was brief and entirely unguarded. She looked away. Chapter 9. The next 48 hours were not hers to be in charge of. She understood that, and she found she did not mind it as much as she might have expected. Kaelin moved through the crisis with the focused efficiency of someone who had trained for exactly this, not this specific situation, obviously, because no one trained for finding out they had a son, and that their head advisor had been concealing him, and that the child was currently in a military garrison, eating hard biscuits with great enthusiasm. But the specific shape of moving quickly through a problem with incomplete information, and making decisions that could not be unmade, that he clearly knew. Messages went out from the garrison in the first hour. Riders heading for the capital, for the king's personal guard, rather than the palace guard, which was apparently a distinction that mattered a great deal in Varath, to the garrison stations that reported directly to the crown, rather than to specific officials. A message went to Lord Dren. Kaelin wrote it himself, and showed it to her before it was sealed, which she had not expected. The message was brief. It said, "I know about the boy. I know about Ashwood. I know about the arrangement you made without my knowledge or consent. Return the documents to my private archive by nightfall, or I will come to collect them myself. It was signed only with his name." "He will know," she said. "Yes. He will know you have the boy. And me. Yes. Will he run?" Kaelin considered this. "No," he said. "Dren does not run. He has been in that palace for 30 years. He will not be able to believe even now that he has lost." A pause. "He will try to negotiate. And the Harwick betrothal. The Harwick family will be notified that circumstances have changed. They will be unhappy. They may withdraw the alliance entirely." He said this with a specific quality of attention, looking at her directly, making sure she understood what he was saying. "I want you to know that I have considered that. I want you to know it does not change anything." She looked at him. "You are giving up a political alliance," she said, "for a child you met this morning." "I am acknowledging my heir," he said quietly, "which is not the same thing." He paused. "And I am acknowledging what I owe." "You do not owe me anything." 3 years, he said. 3 years you raised him alone, not knowing whether I was dead or simply gone, preparing for men who might come in the night, living at the edge of a forest, with no one but an old woman, and your own preparation. You gave him everything I should have been there to share. He held her gaze. "That is a debt I do not have a word for." She was quiet for a moment. "He was never a burden," she said. "I want you to understand that. He is the best thing in my life. I would not unmake a day of those 3 years." "I know," he said, "but I would still give them back to you if I could." She did not have an answer for that. Wren came back into the room at that point, with hard biscuit crumbs on his front, and the garrison captain's hand in his, and an expression of complete satisfaction. "The captain says I can see the horses later," he announced. "He says some of them are very big." "That is correct," Kaelin said. Wren looked at him. "Will you come see the horses with me?" A pause so brief most people would not have caught it. "Yes," Kaelin said. "I will come." Wren nodded, satisfied, and went back to the captain to report this development. She watched Kaelin watch his son walk away. She thought, 3 years ago, I made a decision in the dark to keep a dying man alive, and I did not know what it would cost me, and I did not know what it would become. I only knew it was the right thing to do. She thought, most things are like that. Chapter 10. Lord Dren was arrested on the steps of the palace the following morning. He had not run. He had been waiting in the great hall when the king's personal guard arrived, dressed in his formal council clothes, with the documents in a leather case on the table in front of him. He was 62 years old, and he had served the crown of Varath for 30 of those years. And by all accounts, he looked at the guards with the expression of someone who was not surprised, and who intended to die with the same dignity with which he had lived. Kaelin handled the formal proceedings from the garrison via courier, with a precision and speed that Nora found slightly extraordinary, and which the garrison captain found entirely expected, apparently, because he kept saying, "Yes, that tracks," in a tone of great satisfaction. 2 days later, they rode back to the capital, not in disguise this time. The king's personal guard formed a loose perimeter on the road, and Kaelin rode in the center of it without the dark cloak. And Nora rode beside him, and Wren rode in front of his father on the horse, because he had expressed a very clear opinion about where he intended to be, and it had been unanimous. Wren had taken to his father with the absolute completeness of a child who has found something he did not know he was looking for. It was not complicated for him. His mother loved him. This man was his father, and his wolf smelled like home, and he had come to find them, and had not left. The rest was detail. She watched them ride. She watched Kaelin's arm around his son, the unconscious ease of it already, the way Wren leaned back against his chest and pointed at things on the road, and received answers delivered in the same grave and genuine tone as to a person of entirely equal standing, which she recognized from 3 years of watching it, except it had been her own voice doing it. She thought about the life in the Ashwood that she was leaving. She thought about Edda, who had kissed her once on the forehead and said, "Go and write to me, and do not become the kind of person who forgets where she came from." She thought about the cottage, which would still be there, which she could go back to, which did not have to be a place she was leaving forever, only a place she was leaving for now. She thought about what came next. Kaelin pulled his horse alongside hers. Wren had fallen asleep against his chest, small and boneless, with the total trust of the very young. "Are you all right?" he said. She thought about what an honest answer to that question was. "I do not know what I am," she said at last. "I have spent 3 years building a life that was entirely mine, and now I am riding to a palace with the father of my child, who is also a king, and I do not know what that means, or what you intend, or where I fit in this picture." She paused. "I am not asking you to have those answers immediately. I understand we have been acquainted for approximately 4 days. I am simply telling you that I do not know." He was quiet for a moment. "I know what I intend," he said. She waited. "I intend to know my son," he said. That part is not complicated. The rest. He glanced at her, and the look was careful and direct, and did not look away. The rest, I think we should discuss when we have slept and eaten, and Dren is in custody, and the immediate crisis is behind us. That is reasonable, she said. But I want you to know, he said, that the question of where you fit in this picture is not one I find complicated. I find it... He paused, and she had the impression that he was choosing a word carefully. Obvious, he said, which I understand may not be obvious to you yet. But it is obvious to me. She looked at him. She thought about a cottage in a forest 3 years ago. She thought about conversations in the dark. She thought about a man who said, "I do not think I have stood somewhere like this in a very long time," and who had looked at her in the way that meant the somewhere was not only the forest. She thought, I kept that folded tight for 3 years, because it was a wound that had not quite healed, because I had told myself he was dead or gone, and either way the same result. She thought, he is neither. Obvious, she said. Yes, he said. She looked ahead at the road, and the morning light was clean and cold, and the road ran straight toward the capital, and she thought, I do not know what this is yet. I do not know what it becomes. But I know what it started as, in a small cottage in the Ashwood, when I looked at a man who should not have survived and decided he would. That part, at least, had always been obvious. She had just been afraid to let it be. Wren stirred against Kaelin's chest and made a small sound without waking, the comfortable sound of someone entirely at ease, and Kaelin's arm tightened around him automatically, and Nora thought, there it is. There is the thing that is not complicated. Everything else could be figured out. The road ran on, and the capital rose in the distance, and behind them, in a forest at the edge of the world, her cottage stood empty and quiet and waiting, the way good things wait, without urgency, knowing you will come back. They rode toward whatever came next. She found she was not afraid of it. Epilogue. She found the ring 6 months later. She was unpacking the last of the things she had brought from Ashwood, the final box from the final cart, the one she had kept putting off because it held the small accumulation of 3 years that she had not been sure she wanted to look at all at once. The ring was at the bottom, still in its cloth, still pressed into the corner where she had put it on that night, long ago when she had decided not to know. She sat on the edge of the bed, in the room that was hers now, in the palace that was still strange to her, in 100 small ways, and familiar to her in one very large one, and she unwrapped it. The black stone, the oval, the silver setting. She turned it over and looked at the inside of the band for the first time. An engraving, small and neat and worn slightly smooth with age. 2 words. She read them. She was still sitting with the ring in her hand when Kaelin came looking for her, following the particular quality of quiet that had led him to her in odd corners of the palace, with some regularity in the past months. The quiet of someone thinking something too large to hold in a room with other people. He saw the ring. He was still for a moment. Then he sat beside her on the edge of the bed and held out his hand. She placed the ring in his palm. He looked at the inscription. "You read it," he said. "Yes." "And?" She thought about what the 2 words were. She thought about a man who had walked into her cottage half dead, and had left 3 weeks later without a word, and had spent 3 years with a hole in his memory shaped like her, and who had come to find her the moment he understood what he was looking for. She thought about what the 2 words meant, pressed into the silver of a ring that had belonged to his mother, and that had been in his coat on the night she found him bleeding in the Ashwood. She thought, some things are obvious before you have the words for them. She looked at him. "Come find me," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. "I did," he said. She took the ring back from his open palm. She put it on her own finger. He looked at her hand. "Yes," she said. "I know." He was almost, and then entirely, smiling. Down the corridor, Wren was arguing with his nursemaid about whether wolves were allowed on the furniture, which was a debate that had been ongoing for several weeks, with no resolution in sight, and which Nora expected would continue for some time. She found that this did not worry her at all. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you so much for watching. If you want more stories like this one, with all the tension and twists and characters that will not let you go, subscribe right now and hit the bell so you are the first to know when the next story drops. New stories every week. Do not miss what comes next.